today we're talking about Deborah. And one of the little trivia tests I have for you today is to spot this scene in the opening story of Deborah today. That's kind of hard to tell what that is. Here's what it is. Okay, so it's a mom tucking her daughter in at night. Oh, isn't it nice? Yeah. So, you know, if you're a parent or if you were ever a child, okay, when you get tucked in bed at night, there's usually 3 questions on the tips of the tongue of the one being tucked in. Number 1, will you tuck me in under the covers? Because it's nice to be tucked in, especially to be tucked in around your toes. You know, your toes stick out. Can you tuck me in? Secondly, this is inevitable almost every time. Can I have a drink of water? I mean, really, can I have a drink of water? And then thirdly, now this may not be for everybody. This was always on my mind when I got tucked in. You'll think strange things now, but will you chase the monsters out of my closet? So, you know, there's always spooky things like, can you look under my bed or can you look in the closet? That whole movie, Monsters, Inc. was all premised around the fact that there's a monster in your closet, right? So there's scary things in the dark. Okay, so here's your task. That's a very familiar scene to you. As we start going through the narrative of Deborah, and we're going to do the entire narrative of Deborah today, as you go through the narrative, see if you can spot this scene, okay? And when you see this scene show up in Deborah, and it's not obvious, you need to say, hey, wait a second, okay? So that's your job this morning as we do that. So watch for the tucking in scene. Okay, so here we go. We're on Deborah, a mother in Israel. That is her own phrase for herself, which she'll tell us about, a mother in Israel. And if you want to follow along, we're in Judges 4. So Deborah is during the period of time of the Judges. If you remember, the time of the Judges was this very awkward, almost adolescent time in the life of the nation of Israel, where they'd come out of Egypt, the slavery of Egypt, the Exodus that happens. They went through a whole generation kind of killing time in the desert, wandering because they wouldn't believe that the place was a good place to go. That generation died. Their children came into the land. They finally came into the land with Joshua, and they settled the land. That took several decades. I don't know. Anyway, so it's that awkward time where they are settled in the land, and all of the families settle in the places they're supposed to be in the land, but there's no king yet. And the first king, Saul, and then David won't come for some time. So here's this weird in-between phase where, and you read the book of Judges, it says they did what was right in their own eyes, which is bad. That's very interesting. Okay, so anyway, Judges. Where were we? Judges. So this is the time of the Judges where everyone did what was right in their own eyes, which means everything, not everything, but most things turned out badly. It was a very rocky time in the life of Israel. There were bright spots. And after the story of Deborah, one of the bright spots comes up as well, the famous guy Gideon. Remember that? So what happens is you have this potpourri in Judges of people who aren't really officially in charge of anything, but they do wonderfully beneficial things as time goes on through Judges. And Deborah's one of them. So just remember the fact that this is a real topsy-turvy time in Israel. No one's really in charge. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And Israel, by and large, walked away from the Lord in almost everything they did. But not everybody. There's some exceptions, and Deborah's one of them. Okay, so that's where we are with Deborah. So here's the pre-story. We'll just jump right in. Judges 4 verse 1. The people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. You have to go read Judges 3 to find out who Ehud was. So they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hatzor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. So, okay, so that's, like I said, things are going bad. And so what God does is he withdraws his protection on the people when they're going away from God. He feels no compulsion to protect them if they say, God, we don't need you. And that's where we are right now. After Ehud died, they completely abandoned the Lord. So God said, okay, taking my hands off, and I'm going to make life miserable for you by not defending you against this guy, Jabin, who's up in Hatzor, and his army general Sisera in Harosheth Hagoyim. Now, I'm not going to put a map up because I think it'll distract us some, but this is way up in the north part of the country. So, the north part of the country, which present day goes up into Lebanon, and you go south, you're down into the Sinai Desert. This is pretty far north. So the couple of tribes that settled far north, Naphtali and Issachar, those guys up there, this is happening in Naphtali. If you go to Israel today, there is one flat spot in Israel. Most of Israel is mountainous. But there's this flat spot that goes from Haifa, the port in Haifa, which is up in the north, and it travels, this flat spot goes in, crosses between some mountains, and then it hooks up with the Jordan River Valley and goes south. This big flat spot. Okay, so there's this flat plain that goes from the coast up at Haifa today, connects with the Jordan River Valley and goes south. That's the only flat spot in the country. And because that's the flattest part between the Mediterranean and going south, that's where almost all the traffic went, from Haifa today, this flat spot, and then south. And that's where the Armageddon Valley is as well. So that big flat area like that plain, and that's where things are taking place today. That's Harosheth Hagoyim, is up by Haifa, Israel, up in the north. It's in the flat spot pinched between some mountains, and that's where they live. And Naphtali, which is the country that's the tribe that this is all happening, is just north of that. So they're way up in the north, okay? So we get the geography right and help us out. Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help. Help us! For Sisera had 900 chariots of iron, and he oppressed the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years, for 2 decades. So this is how long the Lord has let these people go and be afflicted by Jabin and his general Sisera. 2 decades they've been dealing with these guys. And now why are these guys such a problem? These are the old Canaanites that didn't get fully pushed out when Joshua came in the land. There's a little hot pot right there. I was going to say a hot pocket. Hot pockets, yeah. There's a little hot spot right up in the north up there, and these guys didn't get pushed out. And now they're causing trouble, and they're causing trouble for 2 decades, and they can overwhelm and keep their position there because they have 900 chariots. Now, if you know chariots, are chariots flat ground or rugged ground devices? Flat ground. So that's why this geography is really important. From Haifa, the flat ground in from Haifa and hooks up to the Jordan, goes south. They have complete control of that flat ground because they have chariots. Chariots during the day, especially iron chariots, are the master tank warfare weapon of the time. They are just very powerful. Well, he had 900 of these. Even at this time, Israel was having a problem making iron for implements, for plowshares and for swords. They had a hard time making this stuff. So guess where they would go to have their iron stuff made? Harosheth Hagoyim, where these guys are. So their enemies who control the iron trade also control the chariots, and they put the people of Israel under their thumb. This is what a chariot looks like. This is a Roman version, so this is sometime after that. It's just a cart that's pulled by 2 horses. You think, well, how can this be a big problem? Really? By the way, if you looked at it, do you see anything wrong with this picture?
Why does he have 4 legs?
He's got 4 legs. Because there's actually 2 guys in the chariot. Okay? There's 2 guys in the chariot. That was just a camera angle problem right there. 2 guys in the chariot. And as the front guy drives, the back guy kills people. Oh, see, this is pretty cool. So if you're in a big flat plain and you're going to try and take out all the soldiers on the other side, you just charge your chariots in there. The guy in front steers the horses, and the guy in the back either has a spear or a sword, and as people come close, he's just kind of whacking them off. And there's no way that the people on the ground can do very much. I mean, they can say, okay, I've got my sword, I'm waiting for him to come, just like a baseball game, and I'll take off his head when he comes by. You can't do it fast enough. Plus, if their chariots are like some of the Assyrian chariots, which we think they are, they had extra things attached to the hubs of the wheels. And what they would put on there, they called them scythes. They're like the scythe you use to harvest grain and stuff like that, cut stuff. They were these 2 long daggers that stuck out on the sides. So if you thought on the ground you could take your sword and get one of these guys as they come by in their chariot, you're going to have to deal with these big swords that are tied to the axle hubs. That's the real problem. And many times all they have to do, the guy in back didn't have to hardly do anything. All they had to do was just charge the chariot out, and with these big scythes on the side, just take out whoever's standing on the field. So with 900 chariots, you can command the area no problem. That's what they're doing. So these are problems. And it seems absolutely impenetrable that they'll ever be able to change this. And sure enough, they benefited from 2 decades of abusing Israel because of their power. Okay, so now we get to the core of the story. That was a pre-story. We have the mother, the general, and the plan. Dun, dun, dun. No sound effects. Okay. Now, Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the people of Israel came up to her for judgment. So this is our backstory on Deborah. Who was she? She's one of those basically unappointed people in the country who brings benefit. Maybe people would have civil disputes about something. And so who do we go to settle our civil disputes? There's no king. There's no magistrates. Who do we go to? And so they would take it to wise people. And Deborah was one of those people. And basically, she set up shop under a palm tree in the hill country of Ephraim. And people would bring problems to her, and she would judge wisely about how to deal with these things. And she was respected just out of, in a sense, popular vote. People would bring their problems to her and say, look, Deborah, I've got this with my neighbor over here. I think he's wrong. And he would get, no, I think you're wrong. And they say, but you know what we'll both do? We will both agree that if we bring our problem to you and you make a decision, we'll abide by what you say. And that's who Deborah was. She was one of these judges that could do that. Now, to do it effectively, you can't just use human wisdom. This is one of those issues where divine wisdom helps a whole lot. Like, the Solomon thing about the two moms arguing over the baby, and then Solomon says, well, let's just cut the baby in half so everyone gets equal amounts. Well, okay, that's a bad solution, but that's really a divinely inspired solution to kind of out what the real issues are and who the real mother is. Well, we're talking with Deborah, we're talking about someone who executes that kind of wisdom in dealing with problems with people. So she's seen, hey, you know what I think it is, Glenn? I just had an aha. On the soundboard on the very far right, there's two outputs. Wiggle those for a second. So where are we? So she's a judge in Israel. She's also a prophetess, if you notice that. She has Is it that same connect? Wiggle those two right connectors again until they get to a position where they stop talking.
Yeah. The USB cable and the audio inputs. Try that. Something's arcing.
Unplug something.
Turn that fan on.
Not me. I know that doesn't do it.
Sure.
Yeah. It's a bad connection over there.
Spread out now. Try now.
Test, am I there? Okay, we'll keep going. I hate it when the virus gets into your electronics. It's bad. Okay, so this is who she is, and that's an important detail in the story to make things make sense a little bit later on. She's highly respected. She's rendering civil judgments for people who have disputes, and she has a connection with God because she's a prophetess. So all of these things really very unusual. We don't see anyone like her pretty much to the rest of judges. And even when you get into the time of the king, she's really quite unique that way. She's not someone who's looking for power and authority. She's someone that people are coming to settle disputes. So that's her. Okay. Verse 6. So she sent and she summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kedesh Naphtali. Wow, I don't know if we're going to get through this today. Okay, she summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kedesh Naphtali. So Deborah calls this guy Barak, okay? He's coming from Naphtali, which is in the north again, right? North of where the bad guys are. She calls him and she says, has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you? Wow, what? Go, gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali, that's a tribe in the north, and from the people of Zebulun, two tribes in the north. Take 10,000 men, well, yeah, and what? Like go attack the 900 chariots? No, something even stranger. Here's Mount Tabor right here. And she's saying, and this, by the way, this is a view from Nazareth. If you ever go to Israel and you look out on that flat plain, there's that flat plain down there. And sticking up out of that flat plain is this knobby hill that's about, 2 miles across in the middle. It's not really that large, but it's a nice knobby hill surrounded by the flat plain. She says, what you need to do is gather these 10,000 people right here and take them to Mount Tabor. Take them onto this mountain right here. Now, the bad guys with the chariots live to the right in this picture, about 10 miles away. But since it's all flat plain, it's highway for chariots, she's saying, gather 10,000 soldiers, basically, and take them on top of the knob. What? And I will draw out Sisera. This is God still talking. I will draw out Sisera, that's the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon. The Kishon River, by the way, kind of cuts through the middle of that flat land, through the river Kishon, with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand. There you go. Deborah says, 2 decades is long enough. Gather 10,000 men from Zebulun and Naphtali and put them on the top of this mountain, and the bad guys will see you, and they'll come out, and God will take care of them. So Barak is a general for Israel, and Barak says to her, well, if I was writing the story, Barak would pause for a long time because he's working through the tactical issues of this, and he's thinking, let's see, take 10,000 guys, put them on the top of a hill. You're kidding, right? You don't really want to do this, right? This is how I would write the story. You don't want to do this. This is tactically stupid. And he doesn't explain it to her, but this is probably what's going through in his head. He's thinking, now look, he's doing a little mansplaining right here. Here's a little knob in the middle of the flat land where all the chariots go, and you want me to collect 10,000 guys, put them on the top of this knob, okay, and then the bad guys will see us go up there, they'll send out their chariots, lickety-split, and what are they going to do? They'll completely surround the knob, and they'll completely cut us off from the outside world. And all they have to do is not even fire a single shot, and they just have to wait for us to die because we run out of food. This is called siege. This is a siege. So if we willingly put our 10,000 men on top of this knob that they can so easily surround, we're dead meat. And so he's thinking, right now, if this plane was going up with Jabin's guys over there, they would be putting together a plan based on the fact that there's 10,000 men reported to be on top of Mount Tabor, and there's 900 chariots surrounding them. This is like instant win. So if they do like a tactical assessment of this is what Barak is thinking. Let's do a tactical assessment. They're probably thinking right now, okay, there's a 6-mile perimeter around Tabor we can do. It can actually be smaller than that. A 6-mile perimeter. We have 900 chariots we can put on the job. That means we can have a chariot every 35 feet surrounding this. So there's no stinking way these guys will get off the mountain alive. And we just have to wait for them to die. So, in terms of the tactical assessment, is that approved? Absolutely. This is a no-brainer. So, when the bad guys hear about the fact that 10,000 soldiers willingly, voluntarily put themselves in sequestration on top of a mountain that can be easily surrounded with 900 chariots every 35 feet. This room is 45 feet wide. You can't even have 900 chariots going without knocking into each other in a 6-mile perimeter. So, I mean, it's going to be an exact military wall they can't get out. This is a no-brainer. We can take out 10,000 of our enemies, and all we have to do is go over there and camp for all. Heck, we can even run the chariots in 3 shifts, and the chariots will still be separated by 100 feet. That's great. I mean, so this is a no-brainer. So all this is going through the tactical mind of Barak, the general of Israel. And he's going, this is a bad plan. I mean, I don't see how this is ever going to work. But remember, Deborah said, do this, and God says, I'll take care of the bad guys. So now you're at the cusp of a problem. Do you really trust that Deborah is connected to God? Because if she's not connected to God, and this is just Deborah's idea, this is certain death for 10,000 men. You can't get more real than this. So, he says to her, if you'll go with me, I'll go. But if you won't go with me, I won't go. That's not a bad idea. He's wondering whether she's connected to God. Well, let's ask her if she's connected to God. If you go up with me, then I'll know that you believe this is from God, because you're going to put your life in danger as well. By the way, this is completely unheard of in warfare back then. You didn't take women up with you on these campaigns. But he's saying, proof in the pudding. If you'll come with us, I'll do this. Now, is that a lack of faith on Barak's part? Yeah, maybe, maybe not, and we'll talk about that at the end. But it is very practical. It is very practical. And so even today, when people say, I've got a message for you from God, all of a sudden, boop, all the skeptical hairs go up in the back of my neck. And I go, well, yeah, let's talk about this a little bit. But if it's something really that we're talking life and death, it'd be nice to ask them if they're willing to put themselves under the same constraints that you are, if it's life and death. So, Barak's thing is very practical, and it's okay. So what does she say? I will surely go with you. Yeah. And that's how sure Deborah is that this word is from God. It's not her own idea. Because she realizes if she goes on the top of Tabor with these 10,000 men, she doesn't have any reason why she should survive any more than the other soldiers. I mean, she's putting her life in danger. She's placing her life in the midst of the fact of the faith in this being a message from God. She's going to do it. But there's a part B to her response. I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you're going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. So what's that about? Well, generals, when they have campaigns, always look forward to coming back in town as the victors and woo, ticker tape parades, woo, and all the accolades that go with that. She's saying, I'll go with you, but if you're getting involved in this because you think you're going to get some glory out of this, you're not. Because guess what? The opposing general is going to be taken out by a woman. Now, in Barak's ears, presumably that woman would be Deborah. Well, that's reasonable. So is she saying, Barak's thinking, is she saying that if we do this thing and God delivers them into our hands, is she saying that God's going to let Deborah herself kill Sisera the general? Wow, this is crazy. Well, that's what it looks like. So Deborah rose, went with Barak to Kedesh. That's where they go up and get the guys. And Barak called out to Zebulun, the tribe up there, Naphtali, the tribe up there, to Kedesh. And 10,000 men went at his heels, and Deborah went up with him. So that means they followed him. When it's at his heels, they followed. So sure enough, he goes up there to the two tribes that are most oppressed by Sisera and his men and his chariots, the people who most are messed up by the 2 decades of this occupation. And he goes up there and says, I need 10,000 volunteers to fight today. The 10,000 show up, and they follow Barak and Deborah to their death at the top of Tabor. This is a tactical plan. And before we finish that story, by the way, a little inclusio, a little detail. Now, Heber the Kenite had separated from the Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, and had pitched his tent as far away as the oak in Za'ananim, which is near Kedesh. Oh, what? Okay, before you say what, too much, let's just back out what the geography is. Do you remember where Moses went when he ran away from Pharaoh's court to try and not get involved in the whole Pharaoh thing before you remember where he went? He went off to shepherd sheep in Midian, which is out in the middle of nowhere, over there on the eastern side of the Dead Sea. Way out there, nowhere land. That's Midian is where that is. Well, Moses, while he's out there trying to run away from his responsibilities in Israel before the Exodus, he's out there. He marries a Midianite out down there, and marries her. And her father is Hobab, and these people are descended from there. So what we're talking about here is that some people who really come from way down here on the eastern side of the Dead Sea have decided they've had it living there, these Midianites, and they lift up and they move away from there. And guess where they move to? Smack dab in the middle of the action for today. Way up here in Naphtali. They've moved up there. So that's what he's talking about. The guy who did that, Heber, the Kenites are the people down there from Midian. They're descendants from Hobab, who was the father of Moses' wife. And they move up to the oak of Za'ananim, which is near Kadesh. So just a little bit of side note to say before we finish the story. Someone who lived way down in Midian as a family moved up into the middle of this hot spot up here. They're really Midianites living in the middle of all this craziness up in Naphtali. Just hold that thought. Yes, hold that thought. That's important. Okay, so here's the battle. This is where we need a good drum roll. Verse 12, when Sisera was told that Barak the son of Abinoam had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera called out his chariots, hey guys, 900 chariots of iron, and all the men who were with him from Harosheth Hagoyim, that's very near Haifa today, to the river Kishon, that's the drainage in the middle of the flat area. So sure enough, he hears the report about them doing the stupidest thing you could ever think about doing. Take 10,000 men, put them on the top of a little knob that's easily encompassed and you can starve them out. And he goes, hey! And he tells his guys, let's go take them out. This is like the sweetest bait you could ever give to a general on the opposing side. The sweetest bait. I mean, there's just no way he's going to get word of this and not say, we got to do this. I mean, we just got to do this. That's why when Deborah talks about what God says, I'm going to draw them out by you doing this. Well, yeah, you take 10,000 men and put them on top of a knob that's easily encircled. That's the best bait ever. They're going to come out. They're just going to come out. They wouldn't come out if you put 10,000 men on the field of battle, but they'll come out if you take those 10,000 men and put them in a vulnerable spot at the top of a hill. He just can't stop himself. So he calls them together, and they decide to go out. Now, they come out, and Deborah and Barak are on the top of Tabor looking out towards where these guys are coming from, and Deborah says to Barak, up, or look, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hand. Does not the Lord go out before you? So you're making a movie of this. And there's 10,000 men on top of this knob. And Deborah and Barak are waiting for some action from the bad guy. They can see all the way down this flat valley. All the way down this flat valley. They know where the guys live at the end of that flat valley. And they're watching, and they're watching. And sure enough, 900 chariots come out of Harosheth-Hagoyim and start aiming towards Tabor. This is what they're seeing. And as soon as they see these chariots coming, Deborah says, hey, go take them. What? Yeah, go take them. Look, there they are. Go take them. Psh, there you go. There you go. We've seen the chariots. Doesn't the Lord go out before you? We're missing some details here, but she says this is the time. Maybe you need to go attack. We need to come off the mountain and go attack. Well, they're sitting ducks if they go on the flat ground where the chariots are. But Deborah says, look, now's the time. Well, we don't know what she's seeing when she says, look. Actually, we will next week. It'll take a little bit of detective work to come with it. But she says, this is the time. So she tells Barak, she advises Barak, the wise general, that you need to attack. So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him, and they were all massacred on the field of battle because they had chariots. No. And the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army before Barak by the edge of the sword. How? Well, the Lord did it. I know, but how? You know, there's a lot of these battle scenes in the Old Testament where, one of my favorites is Jehoshaphat, where this battle goes and God says, you know, I'll be on top of this. This is not your battle. This is my battle. I'll take care of this. But in almost every case after the battle, he gives us an explanation about what happened. In the case of Jehoshaphat, where there are three nations coming into Israel who are going to take over things, the three nations come in. And I mean, it's a sure thing they're all going to die because three of your local neighborhood countries have decided Israel should exist no more. So they bounded together. There are three tribes of these three nations of soldiers. And I mean, it's a sure deal. They're just going to kill all the Israelites. And yet when they come to this field of battle, the next morning, the Israelites look out to see where the bad guys are in the three armies. And when the first view they get them at daybreak, all the three armies are dead. Well, God did that, but he explains it a little bit. It says that two of the armies, who were actually pretty good friends, looked at the third army from the third country and said, you know, we don't really like those guys. Let's take out those guys before we go in and take out Israel. That way we can split the spoil between two of us instead of three of us. Yeah! So they kill the third army that's kind of on the outs. And then the confusion of them killing the third army, they start killing each other so that by the time Israel gets there, there's no one alive. Okay, so that's clearly a God thing, but it sort of explains what happens. Here we don't have an explanation. They come out and should have been killed by these chariots, but the Lord routs Sisera and his chariots and his armies before Barak by the edge of the sword. Wow. So but the fact he says by the edge of the sword means that Barak's 10,000 took out these other guys with their swords. It wasn't a viral infection. It wasn't them killing each other. Somehow, Barak's swords in the hands of 10,000 men took out 900 chariots. That's impossible. But it seems to have happened. Well, Sisera, the general, got down from his chariot and fled away on foot. And this is a little clue for what might have happened, but what we're seeing right here is the fact that he decides he's going to survive better if he gets out of his chariot and runs on foot. his chariot ran out of gas or something. I don't know what it was. I mean, his horses might have been killed. I don't know what it is. He might have broken an axle. Yeah, I don't know. But the general himself goes off and runs off on foot. Now, if I was General Sisera, and I had to abandon my chariot, I'd go to one of my guys who has one of the 900 chariots and say, get out of the chariot, that's mine, and get in that chariot and start going. But that didn't happen either, which sort of suggests either the chariots were too far away from him to do that, or there was something wrong with those chariots too. It's a very odd thing. So Sisera abandons his ultimate weapon of war, the chariot, and goes off on foot, putting himself on equal footing with the soldiers of Israel. The guys are going to be a sitting duck. But he goes off and he runs. He just runs. Well, Barak pursued the chariots and the army to Harosheth-Hagoyim. That's where they came from, which is up near Haifa today. Pursues the chariots back to where they came from. He chases them back to where they came from. And all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not a man was left. So they chased the chariots, turned tailed, and ran back to Harosheth-Hagoyim. Why? 10,000 men? But against 900 chariots? I don't think so. They turned tail and they ran back the other way, and they chased them down and overtook them and killed them all. No, horses pull the chariots. How can men on feet chase down the chariots and kill everybody? This is impossible. It's impossible. And if you're versed in that century of how warfare goes, this story is more implausible by the minute as you read it. Because here it says, not only did the chariots get away, they didn't get away. They turned back towards home, and they got overtaken by the soldiers on foot. This can't happen. So clearly God's hand is in this, but I would like to have more information. Because this is so implausible. By the way, if you ever go to Israel, you have to see the scene of this. Every time we've been, I go to a certain place there, and you can look out across that big flat plain. You can see Mount Tabor way off there in the distance, that little knob. And the plane comes toward you where you're here. And then you can look off to the left, and you can see Harosheth-Hagoyim, which is by Haifa today. You see this big flat plain. And you can just see these chariots coming out of Harosheth-Hagoyim and going across this plain. All in full view of Nazareth, by the way. It's on a hillside right there. You can look down and see the whole thing going on. And out toward Tabor. I mean, it's electrifying. So I had a big dispute with my Israeli guide last time we were there about this, but I won. Okay, so not a man was left. Well, General Sisera, who went off on foot, he snoozes. So Sisera, end of the story. Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, or if you want to say it right, Yale. Okay, it sounds like Yale University. To Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Oh, remember Heber? He's the guy that came up from Midian. He's not really Israeli. He's like from out in the desert where Moses was tending sheep. Okay, goes to the wife of Heber the Kenite for there was peace between Jabin the king of Hatzor and the house of Heber the Kenite. So what we thought was a stupid detail before is the fact that these people way down here in the southeast, on the eastern side of the Dead Sea, the Kenites, had some kind of truce with Jabin up in the north and all of his troops. So when Sisera's on foot and he finds out that this little enclave of Kenites up here is here, that's safe ground. They're not Israelites. So Sisera's on foot and figures maybe I can find refuge with these people because they're not Israelites. That's why it was important. So Jael comes out to meet Sisera and says to him, "Turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me. Don't be afraid." Okay, this is good news to Sisera. He's been running a long time. He's run out of the plains where the battle took place and probably ran very far north and up into some mountainous areas. I mean, the guy's tired. He's looking for refuge. This is a safe tribal camp. And she comes out of the tent and says, "You can come here." Sisera is very happy. So he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. Yes. And he said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." So she opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. What's he going to do next? And he said to her, "Stand at the opening of the tent, and if any man comes and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say no." That's the monster part. If bad things come, will you chase them away? it's a really eerie kind of mother situation going on right here, because he comes in looking, I know, it's just odd. It gives you like he comes in looking for a safe place. She says, here, lie down here, I'll tuck you in. She tucks him in. He sticks his head out from underneath the rug and says, can I have a drink of water? And she says, sure, you know what? I'll give you some milk. Oh, it's a very motherly thing to do. I'll give you some milk. And then as he's tucking in for the last time, he says, well, can you do one more thing? Can you check out the door, make sure that no bad guys come? Yes, I can. This is why it's creepy, because this is a very motherly scene. Until what happens next. But Jael, the wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand. Cue creepy music is not in Judges 4, but that's where you cue the creepy music. So he's under the rug, he's tucked in, he's had his warm milk for the night, and she saunters over, she picks up a tent peg, because after all, she's a pioneer woman. She probably put the tent pegs in that tent herself and hammered them in with her own hammer. She grabs the tent peg and she grabs a hanger, and she went softly to him, and she didn't kiss him on the forehead goodnight. She drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground while he was lying fast asleep from weariness. See, that's where this is creepy. Because it's this wonderfully warm, welcoming, motherly scene. And then she creeps on him so as not to arouse him. Shh. Grabs her tent peg. Shh. Grabs her hammer. Shh. Kind of stands over where he's laying underneath this rug. Slowly, so as not to arouse him, brings the tent peg onto the side of his head. And whack! Puts it right through his head and into the ground beneath. What? What? Just wrecked that whole motherly scene. Oh, and by the way, the writer of this episode right here is not sure if you get exactly what the consequences of that action was. So he says very clearly, he died. I just love this. Well, yeah, I guess so. I mean, it didn't just glance off his head. It went through his head into the ground. Of course he died. So he died. Well, behold, as Barak, the Israeli general, was pursuing Sisera, Jael went out to him and said to him, hey, come and I'll show you the man you're seeking. And so he went into her tent, and there lay Sisera dead with the tent peg in his temple. Hey, Barak, you're looking for someone? He's here. Now, Barak's probably thinking, what? He's like, he's in your tent? I'm sure he came to the tent fully armed with a whole bunch of guys, because Sisera would be in there going armed to the teeth to defend himself. She says, he's right here. But Barak's probably trying to figure out why it is she's being so open about it, because if Sisera's behind her in the tent and she's out there saying, he's here, she would be killed by Sisera, who's trying to remain hidden. So why is she saying, come over here, the guy you're looking for, he's in here, and she's not dying from a sword in the back? And of course, when Barak comes in the front door, he realizes it's because not only does she not have a sword in her back, but he's got a tent peg in his temple. He's gone. Whew. So, in summary, the writer says, verse 23, so on that day God subdued Jabin, the king of Canaan, before the people of Israel. Who did this? Deborah? No. No. Barak? No. God did this. All of this God did. Through these people, God did this. And the hand of the people of Israel pressed harder and harder against Jabin, the king of Canaan, until they destroyed Jabin, king of Canaan. Something they should have done when Joshua brought them into the land. They should have pushed these guys out of the area, and they didn't. But because of this particular event, they sort of got their gumption together, and they said, well, if God has given them into our hands, let's take care of them. And what the writer of Judges says right here is that that's exactly what happened. They got serious about them, and they wiped them off the land, and they're gone. They're just gone. I always wondered after that where the Israelites were running around in chariots after that. I don't think so. I don't think so. Well, that's the end of chapter 4. That, in fact, is the entire story of Deborah. Except We are in a wonderful position because I tell you that when we read narratives, you read the actual story, and then you need to push back when you get done. You need to ask some probing questions and ask yourself, why did God include this story, and what can I learn from this on a spiritual dimension that's deeper than just the physical story? And so this is where you kind of push back from your desk and you think for a second, go, no. So what does this all mean? Well, it turns out that to help you in that process, they wrote chapter 5. So we're going to look at chapter 5 next week and the week after that. Chapter 5 isn't a commentary on the narrative you saw. It's a song. They wrote a song about this entire event. They wrote a song about Deborah and about Barak and about Mount Tabor. And they even included in the song Jael. I mean, it's what? So they wrote a song. And in that, so we'll look at that song next week in chapter 5. It is a commentary in a way, but it's really explaining and highlighting what God had done in more detail. And so we're going to use that as a jumping off place for the next 2 weeks to draw more conclusions about the whole story that you've heard the whole thing this morning. That's all the narrative. There's no more narrative after this. In fact, after you read the song in the next chapter, and we'll look at that for the next 2 weeks, the chapter after that is our favorite story about Gideon. So this is all you're really going to get about the narrative of Deborah and Barak and Sisera and Jabin, all those kind of guys. So we're going to look at that then. But before we do that, since this is mostly set up for the next 2 weeks, next time we'll look at that song. It's in Judges 5. You can read ahead if you want, because now that you know the entire narrative, the song in the next chapter will make a lot of sense to you. I mean, you'll start piecing together wonderful things as a result of that. So we'll look at that, and we'll draw most of our conclusions over the next 2 weeks as we look at that song. But before we do that, there's a couple of questions after this narrative that rise to my head, and probably yours at the same time. Here I am scratching my chin about it. How were 900 chariots defeated? I mean, really? And you can say, well, God did it. Oh, I know God did it, but how did he do it? What did he use to do that? I mean, did he just snap his finger and they all evaporated? No, that didn't happen, because we know that a lot of the chariots turned around and they went back to Harosheth Hagoyim where they came from. But even in their going back to Harosheth Hagoyim, they were overtaken by guys on foot. So there's a lot of questions I have about this. And I'd love to answer these questions because tactically speaking, the narrative is just so incredible and impossible. I'd like to know how God did this. Did he just cause confusion? Did he do like Jehoshaphat's enemies and they killed each other? Oh, we don't have any sense of that. So I would like to know. But what we're going to have to do is take that question, and we're going to have to wait till next week in the song, because the song has some incredible things in it that lets you know exactly how God did this. It's really cool, okay? Well, you'll have to wait for the song. But instead of waiting for everything from there, I'll ask one exit question right here. This is the exit question that I think is worth pondering right now, because you know the story. Why in the world would Barak trust Deborah? I mean, really, why? And you could take the easy answer, which was, well, he's a man of God. He's a man of faith. And so he's just, doing what God says. But that's, I know, it's more than that. Because the question is, even though he may have been faithful to who God was and believed who God was, why would he believe that Deborah, a woman, is speaking for God? That's the biggest question. Why would, and not only say, yeah, well, whatever, Deborah, and then not do anything, but actually endanger the lives of 10,000 men. And in fact, when he goes up in the north to Naphtali and Zebulun, to the tribes in the north, he says to them, okay, I need 10,000 volunteers to fight. And you know what their first question is going to be? Okay, so what's your plan? And he's going to have to say, well, we're going to go up and sit at the top of Mount Tabor. And they're going to go, hey, never mind. So where did you get this stupid plan, Barak? From her. And then he's going to have to explain to them that Deborah is speaking for God.
Deborah must have had a pretty good reputation.
Yeah, so why would he believe? Why would he believe her? Toss out a few. Why do you think he would actually do this? Why would he believe Deborah? What basis does he have to believe Deborah? And to such a degree that he's willing to put all these lives in danger. And even ask for other people to sacrifice. Why would he believe Deborah?
And why would they follow him?
And why would they follow him? Well, presumably he has some reputation as a general in Israel. He probably had a reputation until he told them what the plan was. he lost his entire credibility in one fell swoop. Why would he believe Deborah? And this is the speculation that we push back from and wonder about, because, again, remember, the dynamics of a woman speaking for God are very unusual. Very unusual. They're second-class citizens without question, but somehow, if I was God and I was going to try and direct someone to do something as crazy as this and try and convince Barak of that, I'd use some highly placed male older authority in the country, someone who's got some real cred, right? Would I use Deborah? So why would he believe? Well, there's two things rise pretty quickly. First, she probably demonstrated this transcendent wisdom, this wisdom from God as a judge. So remember, she's got decades, presumably, decades of influence in the communities right there, wisdom that can only come from God. She's got a track record, which is why they gave us her track record at the beginning of the story. She's got a track record, and that track record would say to all the people in the area, this woman somehow has a connection with God that allows her to make decisions as a judge that are extraordinary and better than everyone else. And that's why everyone comes to her. And she actually takes her folding chair in the morning, opens it up at the base of this palm tree, and people just come to her. It was so famous that the palm tree was called the palm tree of Deborah. So that's one thing. So when she comes with this proposal to Barak, Barak has got to look at her entire history as a judge and as a prophetess speaking for God and say, she is connected with God unlike almost anyone else I know. If anyone's going to speak for God, her track record gives her credibility for me to say she's speaking for God. Her track record does. So for number one, that's not a wasted piece of the story at the beginning that she was a judge in Israel all that time. And an unappointed, voluntary, show up with a folding chair judge. It showed that she was specially imbued by God in a connection in that way to bring wisdom and peace in a community. She had demonstrated who she was by decades of being faithful to God. Now that's a really big deal, because now we're at this point where she needs to cash in all that credibility for this one gigantic event. And she had done that by decades of being faithful to God in the midst of the community. Now, as an application, that rings a lot of bells. Because it turns out that it's very similar to the Esther story. Esther was placed in a place of influence and position, not of her own doing necessarily, but as her cousin and guardian said to her, he said, listen, this entire history that you've had that has culminated with you now being queen of Persia, maybe it's all been for this moment. We're going to cash in all of that now for this moment. And in the same way with Deborah, all of those years of people squabbling in the desert under the palm tree and her exercising divine wisdom in the midst of those things, all of that credibility has been built over decades, and now it gets cashed in on this gigantic event. And without that, it probably wouldn't have happened. Barak probably wouldn't have believed her. And that also gives me hope too, because it's telling me that in our normal course of our lives, we are not involved in great battles like Barak and Deborah, but we are involved in the daily stress of bringing the presence of God into the midst of people's problems. That's all Deborah was doing. That's all she was doing. And she was demonstrating the fact that there was a God who is near, there was a God who cares about your circumstances, a God who wants to bring peace to your situation. And she probably asked herself for years, why am I sitting under this stinking palm tree again today? All I hear is people bickering at one another. Rah, 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 I've had it up to here. I'm done with this. But no, I need to bring God's influence to the situation of this turmoil. And at this particular juncture, she could probably go back and see her history in the desert under the palm tree and say, that's why I was under the palm tree. So at the moment when Barak had to weigh my credibility, he could look at those decades of faithfulness and say, oh, well, she's a woman of God. I'll trust what she says. So in the essence of how God uses you, be faithful in the immediate, wherever he's placed you. Be faithful in the immediate in terms of bringing God's influence into the immediate of wherever he puts you. And it can be in front of whiners. Can't look at people when I say that. I mean, it can be burdensome. But God will use that history and he'll cash it in for his purposes. He does, even though it looks like it's purposeless to you. So that's one thing. I think that's one reason why he trusted her. You know, the other one was, and this is pretty obvious, she was all in. She was all in her trust in God. She said, I'm going with you. I will place my life in danger along with you. That was a gigantic influence on Barak, I have to believe. You know, she's not just spouting off stuff because she thinks she's really hot stuff. She's saying, this is what God is asking us to do, and I believe this so much, I will go with you, and if it's not the word from God, I'll die with you. Well, that's very influential with someone like Barak. And there's an aspect of that in our lives as well, where we have to enter into the lives of other people. And when we enter into them and we ask God to work through us and what they're doing, we have to be willing to place ourselves in their shoes and in their contexts. And in their context. And in the process of doing that, what we do is they tell us, you're with me. And what you're saying to me, I believe more because you are willing to place yourself in the same thing I'm doing right here. You're walking with me through all this. You're not just taking some kind of nice piece of advice and you're casting it out and saying, well, God, I hope that works out. Bye. That's not what Deborah did. She said, this is what God is saying, and I'm coming with you. We're doing this together. And that has a really close tie to when we do that with other people as well. They need to understand both not just the admonitions that come from the Lord and the wisdom that comes from the Lord, but they really need to know that you're willing to walk with them as they work through that admission. That's a really big deal. It personalizes that. We all too often fall into this position where we say, I know what's wise. Here, I will dispense it to you. And now I'm separated from you. You take that. All you were asking for me was wisdom. You weren't asking for me to be involved. No, you need to be involved as well. And so she said, I'll be involved to the point of death. So I'm proving that this is coming from God because I'm putting myself in danger. So those are probably the two big ones. You can probably think of other reasons why Barak would trust her. But in the story, in the narrative, just the naked narrative all by itself, it does not make any sense that he would trust her and do this. Especially if he's in charge of raising an army and explaining to them why this plan is going to work. So I have to believe, although it doesn't tell us, that when he went up to Naphtali and Zebulun and he was looking for 10,000 volunteers, people who had been hounded and oppressed by these chariots for 2 decades, it cut off their connection in the north from their cousins in the south. 2 decades. I have to believe that when he would talk to them, he'd say, well, listen, I know this is a crazy plan, but this is from God. And God's got this battle, and he'll take it. And that was the convincing story he gave to the volunteers. This is God's plan. I know you look at it from a human perspective and say, this is nuts. But this is God's plan. Oh, yeah? How do you know this is God's plan? Deborah, the respected woman of Israel, with the credibility from decades of bringing benefit to people here. She's connected to God. She's a prophetess. God gave her that word. She gave it to me. I believe it. Let's do this. Let's obey. And that's how it works. So in the end here, Barak trusting Deborah is one of the biggest quandaries of the entire story, actually. But I think that God had laid enough credibility issues at the feet of Barak. He says, well, this is sort of not a no-brainer, but everything hinges on her spirituality and her connection to God. And you can increase your credibility in people's lives when you talk about issues or bring advice by just living the normal Christian life today for decades. And that changes in terms of people's minds about your credibility. There's a real sense in which people who are in chaos, who don't know the Lord, who are casting back and forth, who really are in a bad way, they're looking for some kind of stability in the sphere of people that they touch with. And 9 out of 10 people that they're in contact with are struggling with the same kind of instability problems. You know, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what life is all about. I don't know why this happened to me. I mean, all these, I don't know, everything's horrible, everything's bad. Everyone has this resonance. Here, let's go out and have a drink tonight and we'll all commiserate about how bad everything is for all of us. But then every now and then, someone shows up and says, well, I don't think everything is as hopeless as you think it is. I think there's more going on than meets the eye. Do you know anything about who God is and what his loving kindness is for you? And in the midst of that, there's such a huge contrast that people who will listen to you when you say that, and they'll say, you know, I tend to believe what you're saying because I've seen the track record of your life the last couple decades. All that stuff that was mundane, seemed like it had no point. They'll put those together like Barak said, and they'll say, there's something going on here that I have to listen to. Well, that's how God uses us in the context of what we do, by us just being faithful on a daily basis with wherever we are, whatever's in your hands, what's on your plate right now. That's what Deborah did for 2 decades, and that was the key to help Barak do this thing. Sounds kind of mundane, but it's real. Okay, next week we'll look at the song, and you can read ahead if you want. It's in Judges 5. And we won't sing the song because we don't have a recording of it. But this Be Thou My Vision we're going to close with, because this is very much the case. It's not what's in the physical narrative that changes everything. It's what's in the invisible narrative that changes everything. God is at work through all of this. God's the one who's orchestrating all of this. And he's the one who finally heard the cries of his people, from whom he released his defense from Jabin and Sisera. And now as they cry out for help, he listens and he comes back and he re-engages on their behalf. He is the one who actively makes the story of Deborah and Barak happen. Has very little to do with Barak, has very little to do with Deborah. It has everything to do with God. So he needs to be our vision in every circumstance. Okay, let's just quit. Father in heaven, we thank you for this story. We look forward next week and the week after that to understanding more about it as we read this song that was written to describe what happened in all of this. And God, as we put this narrative off the front of our tables here for a second, I pray that you'd give us an understanding that as we do what seems like the mundane, daily faithfulness things as we walk with you, that these things don't lose visibility to those who are seeing. That you use even the ordinary that we do for extraordinary things for your kingdom. And that even if it's like Deborah, who just routinely went out and encouraged and admonished and brought peace to those who are around her. God, we pray that you would use our, what seem like mundane actions amongst those who really need you, and that you would translate those into an opportunity for the gospel, so that you would introduce yourself to those who are watching. Lord, we don't know why you involve us in such important things as this. We don't know why you use flawed people like us in a way to draw people to yourself, but you do. And so we pray that you would, through your Spirit that's inside of us, glorify yourself in the simplest things we do on a consistently faithful basis, so that you might be glorified in the large in the end. And we don't know how you connect those dots, but you do. And you did for Deborah, and you did for Barak, and you brought this great success. And it's all because of you. So thanks for this story, and pray you give us more understanding next week through your Spirit. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.